9th. Page 28, House Bill 705, a bill to amend and reenact sections of the Code of Virginia relating to out-of-state concealed handgun permits. Report from the Committee on Militia, Police, and Public Safety. And, Mr. Speaker, there are several floor amendments.
The gentleman from Shenandoah, Mr. Gilbert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, House Bill 705 would essentially bring us into the same policy that 18 other states already have with regard to their concealed handgun permit rules. In those 18 states, they recognize universally reciprocity with all other states that issue such permits. Of course, the bill is structured in a way that it recognizes all valid permits from all other states, but the real benefit to Virginians, Mr. Speaker, is that Virginians, as they travel, will no longer have to be caught up wondering whether a particular state that allows for concealed carry, whether their permit is valid. There are only a handful of states, I think 3, that where this is really an issue, that do not currently recognize Virginia's permits because we do not recognize theirs. As the Assembly has, or as the House has heard me say many times before, permit holders are among the most law-abiding of all of our citizens. That is true of every state. And so really the only impact, though the specter of other impacts I'm sure will be raised before we're concluded with this legislation, the only real impact is that it's going to protect Virginia citizens as they travel with the lawful ability to protect themselves and their families. And so for those reasons, Mr. Speaker, I would move that the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? You have floor amendments. Clerk will report floor amendments.
Floor amendment offered to the introduced version by Delegate Surovell, line 23. After the word purposes, insert that states' laws are adequate to prevent possession of a permit or license by persons who would be denied a permit in the Commonwealth under Section 18.2-308.9, parentheses 1 through 4, comma, or 18, close parentheses, and.
Gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Surovell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, there are 4 floor amendments in front of you. What I attempted to do was to build back into the reciprocity process 4 different categories of persons that Virginia law currently excludes from obtaining a concealed weapon permit. The first one is for the mentally ill, the second one is for violent crimes, the third one's for drugs, and the last one has to do with people illegally present. The one in front of you has to do with mental illness. Right now in Virginia, under the subsections listed 1 through 4 and 18, a Virginian is not entitled to obtain a concealed weapon permit if they have been acquitted by reason of insanity, if they're deemed legally incompetent by a judge, or if they have been court-ordered into mandatory outpatient mental health treatment. Subsection 2 is if they were discharged on for mental health treatment from the state within the last 5 years. Subsection 3, I believe, was whether they had their competency restored in the last 5 years. For example, if somebody was deemed to be incompetent, but their competency had been now restored, there's a 5-year period where you have to wait to get a concealed weapon permit in Virginia. Number 4 has to do with insanity again, and then number 18, subsection 18 would prohibit anybody from getting a concealed weapon permit in Virginia if the person has received mental health treatment or substance abuse treatment in a residential setting within 5 years prior to the date of his application for a concealed handgun permit. So what this amendment does is it says if you can't get a handgun permit in Virginia because you've either been found to be insane, legally incompetent, or you have done residential treatment, you can't get a permit. This would say that if a state does not have those similar provisions on their books, we will not recognize that state's concealed weapon permit in Virginia. I think this is a public safety matter, Mr. Speaker, and I think it's a good amendment.
Mr. Speaker, parliamentary inquiry.
Gentleman, state it.
Mr. Speaker, am I correct from the gentleman's explanation that basically it's 4 amendments, but all doing the same thing with just different barriers, shall we say, from other states? So the parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Speaker, would be, can we act on these as a block?
Well, I talked to the clerk about that, and he suggested that the patron of the amendments wanted to have them brought up one at a time.
That's correct, Your Honor. Mr. Speaker, we haven't given you a robe yet. But that's correct, Mr. Speaker. I mean, to put all 4 in a block in, I think would basically negate the bill. And so they have to be, the 4 have to be taken separately.
Mr. Speaker,
The gentleman from Shenandoah, Mr. Gilbert.
further parliamentary inquiry.
Gentleman state it.
Whether or not we place these amendments into a block, is that a matter for the body to decide by vote, or is that a matter for the gentleman to decide at his discretion?
I think it's my discretion.
Mr. Speaker,
The gentleman from Shenandoah.
I have a motion.
Gentleman state it.
I would move to pass by the amendment. I would like to speak to that motion.
Gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, the gentleman has articulated a problem that is really not a problem, in that if you are precluded from possessing a firearm for the reasons he has stated based on mental health, whether you have a permit or not is irrelevant, because you're not allowed to possess a firearm anyway. So I would move that we pass by the amendment.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the motion.
Gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Surovell.
Ladies and gentlemen, my read of the amendment, maybe the gentleman from Shenandoah, correct me if I'm wrong, is that somebody like, for example, Sung Bin Cho, gentleman who shot up Virginia Tech, who received mental health treatment about 2 years, I think he was ordered into mental health treatment by the court 2 years before he went to Virginia Tech. He could not get a concealed weapon permit in Virginia, but now he can go to Utah, as long as he can prove he can meet Utah's requirements, which I think are, I haven't looked them up, but it's probably be 21 years old, pay a fee, and be legally present, and take a Utah permit, come back to Virginia, and walk around with his driver's license and a Utah permit. That is what this is seeking to prevent. A vote in favor of this motion is a vote to allow somebody like that to have a concealed weapon permit in Virginia. And Mr. Speaker, the last thing I'll say is concealed weapons aren't only limited to firearms. You can carry a lot of other weapons as well besides a firearm with a CWP.
Mr. Speaker,
Gentleman from Shenandoah, Mr. Gilbert.
just to reiterate, speaking to the motion, if you are precluded from having a firearm based on your mental health status, whether or not you have a permit from another state will not allow you, and I can't think of any scenario by which the specter the gentleman raises would actually come to pass, but that notwithstanding, you can't possess a firearm if you're under those conditions. So the proposed amendment is irrelevant in that regard.
The gentleman from Shenandoah, Mr. Gilbert, has moved that we pass by amendment number 1. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. Sufficient up. As many as favor the motion will vote aye on the electronic voting board.
Yes, yes, yes.
Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 62, noes 31.
Ayes 62, noes 31. The motion is agreed to. Clerk will report second floor amendment.
Second floor amendment to the introduced version offered by Delegate Surovell. Again, line 23, after the word purposes, insert that states' laws are adequate to prevent possession of a permit or a license by persons who would be denied a permit in the Commonwealth under Section 18.2-308.9, parentheses 5, 12 through 15, 17, close parentheses, and.
Gentleman from Carolina, Mr. O'Rourke.
Mr. Speaker, I move to pass by the amendment.
Speaking to the motion, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah, the gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Surovell.
2 minutes, right? Mr. Speaker, this amendment would prohibit a person from going to Utah if they're subject to restraining order or protective order, if they are fugitive from justice, if a court finds by preponderance of the evidence that they are likely to use a weapon unlawfully or negligently to endanger others, if they have been convicted of assault, assault and battery, sexual battery, discharging a firearm in public or in a public place, or brandishing within a 3-year period before the application, or an individual convicted of stalking, or a person who has a felony charge pending but has not been convicted yet. So this amendment would prohibit that kind of person from going to Utah and getting a concealed weapon permit and bringing it back to Virginia. I would urge the body to vote against the motion to pass by.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
From Carolina, Mr. Rock.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, I made the motion to pass by the amendment, and the rationale is parliamentarily, if you have a measure put before you that you think potentially could muddy the waters on the policy of an issue, if you have a measure put before you such as this amendment that you feel is not necessary to the underlying administration, then the most expedient way to handle that, to limit debate on the matter, would be to move to pass by the amendment, thereby restricting discussion or debate to the 2-minute window on each side so that the body might move efficiently forward. In the event that there were to fail, then the amendment would be back before us. But, Mr. Speaker, I would say to the body, the policy question on the motion to pass by the amendment is whether we think the underlying amendment is legitimate or not. If we do not think it needs to be addressed more than 2 minutes, then we should vote for the motion to pass by, and I would encourage the body to do so.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
The time for and against has been used, so we're going to vote on the bill. As many as favor the motion from the gentleman from Carolina, Mr. Orrock, will please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no? No. The motion is agreed to. Sufficient. Shall the motion be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 60, noes 32.
Ayes 60, noes 32. The motion is agreed to. Clerk will report a floor amendment.
Third floor amendment to the introduced version offered by Delegate Surovell. Again, line 23, after the word purposes, insert that states' laws are adequate to prevent possession of a permit or license by persons who would be denied a permit in the Commonwealth under Section 18.2-308.9, parentheses 8, 9, 18 through 20, close parentheses, and.
Gentleman from Carolina, Mr. Orrock.
Mr. Speaker, I move to pass by the amendment.
Speaking to the motion, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Surovell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This floor amendment, ladies and gentlemen, would prohibit a person who is addicted to or an unlawful user or distributor of marijuana.
Speaker, parliamentary inquiry.
Gentleman may state it.
Mr. Speaker, the gentleman's motion was to pass by the amendment. Is this the time to actually discuss the amendment, or would that be pursuant to following this motion?
Yeah, you have 2 minutes on each side, and he can use it however he wishes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment would prohibit a person who from going to Utah and getting a permit and bringing it back to Virginia if they're addicted to or an unlawful user or distributor of marijuana, synthetic cannabinoids, controlled substances.
Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Prince William, Mr. Marshall.
Would the gentleman yield for a question?
Not on this.
Gentleman yield.
I'm not sure you can on a motion to pass by, but no.
You can, but he didn't. Okay, thank you.
Gentleman, continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the intent, but I only got 2 minutes here. Number 9.
About a minute and a half.
Okay, got it. It would also prohibit a person who is convicted of DWI or an out-of-state DUI within the 3-year period preceding when they apply. It would also, again, includes the inpatient substance abuse exemption, and also any kind of drug offense conviction. So it prohibit anybody who's basically using drugs or addicted to drugs or been treated for drugs from getting a concealed weapon permit. They get denied in Virginia, they go to Utah to get one, come back here. This would keep, drug dealers and drug users from getting concealed weapon permits and being able to use them in Virginia.
Gentleman from Shenandoah, Mr. Gilbert.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure what the gentleman thinks is going on in Utah exactly, but I will tell him that since he's used that as an example for 3 times now, that we already have reciprocity with Utah. I know he's using it as a hypothetical. However, the only problem as a practical matter that this addresses, there are not states that have these issues about lax concealed carry laws that this bill will affect as a practical matter. The 3 states, which are Colorado, New Hampshire, and Georgia, with whom we will now have reciprocity if this bill passes, lack reciprocity with us because of this provision that requires them to have a 24/7 check available. That is the only issue. It is not that they have lax concealed permit laws. And so, this, again, the specter that the gentleman has tried to raise, I think, is not valid, and I would support the gentleman's motion to pass by the amendment.
The question is on adoption of the motion from the gentleman, Caroline, Mr. Orrock. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. Nays. Gosh, it takes all of them. Shall the motion be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 60, noes 33.
Ayes 60, noes 33. The motion is agreed to. Clerk will report amendment.
4th amendment to the introduced version offered again by Delegate Surovell, line 23, after the word purposes, insert that states' laws are adequate to prevent possession of a permit or license by persons who would be denied a permit in the Commonwealth under Section 18.2-308.9, parentheses 10, close parentheses, and.
Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Speaker.
Caroline, Mr. Orrock.
Mr. Speaker, I move to pass by the amendment. And can I speak on it first this
Point
time?
of order.
Gentleman from Prince William.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman may proceed.
The gentleman has yet to explain that, in fact, the statutes that he seeks to amend from whatever states he's speculating on are, in fact, contain such items as he wishes to address. I question whether this amendment is germane. I should have asked the question 3 of these amendments ago. But I question the germaneness of it because he's not cited the relevance of those statutes, of the concealed carry statutes, to this law in Virginia.
I'm going to rule that the proposed amendment is germane because it's dealing with concealed weapon permits. It's dealing with the same issue.
I had to try.
Yes, you do have.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to my motion.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you. I wanted to go first. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, I'm kind of new down here. But when I first got here, it was kind of the mirror image of what we got now. And I understand when you're in the minority, you sometimes put amendments forward that really aren't necessary, but just because you're trying to gain some type of political leverage. And Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, I would suggest that that's what we're about here today. Otherwise, these would have all been put together in one amendment, acted in a block, but rather by separating them out, trying to get us on the board 4 times on brochure pieces, as it were, when the patron of the bill, the gentleman from Shenandoah, has said clearly the amendments are superfluous. He didn't use that word. Don't ask me to spell it. They're not necessary. And let's move on with the business of the House and stop playing the political games here today. Hope it be the pleasure of the body to pass by the amendment.
Speaking of the motion, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Surovell.
I wish it were that simple, folks, but it's not. Let me tell you why. The concealed weapon permit statute, if we were to do what the gentleman suggests, then we just vote against the entire bill because the bill basically takes all of these 4 categories and deletes them. And so by having 4 votes, It allows this body to say, we want people who are mentally ill to be able to have reciprocity, people who are drug users to have reciprocity, and people who are sexual batterers and stalkers to have reciprocity. You can't just put them all four back in. The reason that the amendment is necessary is because I don't trust the legislature of Alabama to write my concealed weapons statute in Virginia. And I don't know what they're going to do now or next year or 5 or 10 years from now. Who gets a concealed weapon permit in Virginia is up to Virginians, and it's up to this legislature, and that's what this is about. And with having said that, Mr. Speaker, this last amendment is about illegal people who are illegally present. And all this last one says, I'm not sure if it was explained, but all it says is that if the reciprocating state does not confirm somebody's legally present in the United States, then we will not recognize their permit. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
General Shenandoah, Ms. Gilbert.
The gentleman was trying to make it simple. I'm going to make it just as simple. It is a felony to possess a firearm if you are an illegal alien in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Regardless of whether you have a permit from another state or not, you would still be in violation of the law.
Point of order.
Mr. Speaker.
Gentlemen, may state it.
Mr. Speaker, I believe we were in a posture of debating on the merits of pass by, and each side would have had 2 minutes. I'm afraid I used up our side's 2 minutes. I think he has that side.
No.
And so while I appreciate the gentleman
Actually,
from Shenandoah's remark.
A minute and 48 seconds, and he was just rounding it out. Why don't you all save me a step and just ask for ayes and nays? Shall the motion be agreed to? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 60, noes 32.
Ayes 60, noes 32. The motion is agreed to. We have any more amendments? Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading?
Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Henrico, Mr. Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I actually have some questions about the substantive parts of the bill, and I'd ask the gentleman, the delegate from Shenandoah, to rise and yield for a question.
Will the gentleman yield?
I yield.
Gentleman yields.
I would ask the gentleman, Mr. Speaker, since existing law requires that Virginia's sister state, the issuing authority, provide for an instantaneous verification, but that this bill guts that language, could the gentleman explain the logic for striking the language in the existing legislation that requires instantaneous verification?
Mr. Speaker, I would answer the gentleman by saying that the logic is that, unlike the gentleman from Henrico, I do not take a knee-jerk reaction of viewing folks who carry a concealed weapon permit.
Mr. Speaker, is that not a violation of Rule 59? I asked a legitimate question regarding striking instantaneous verification, and we hear rhetoric about the gentleman from Henrico doing something completely different.
I decline to yield, Mr. Speaker.
Good to see that debate is alive and well in Mr. Jefferson's world, Mr. Speaker. Since the gentleman declines, I'd ask to speak to the bill.
Gentlemen, I'll get back to you when I get through the
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Arlington, Mr. Lopez. Is that in the 8th District?
I think so. Actually, let's ask everybody. Inquire for the patron, sir. Mr. Speaker.
Will the gentleman yield?
I yield.
Mr. Speaker, the state police would be unable to verify the certain validity of out-of-state permits in all situations. Would the patron be able to tell us what the position of the state police was on this legislation?
Be happy to, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as is so often the case when we try to expand the rights of permit holders and those who choose to protect themselves, yes, indeed, there are some administrative reasons why the state police disagree with that, and I think it regards the ability to have a 24/7 check on those states that don't have that readily available. The knee-jerk reaction to which I was trying to refer to previously, Mr. Speaker, is that there are those in this body who view those who carry a concealed permit in the same light as they would a common criminal. And I think the overwhelming evidence throughout the nation, especially in those 18 states that now have this very type of universal reciprocity, is that folks who undertake the notion to receive this permit so they can protect themselves and this family and their families are overwhelmingly law-abiding to the tune of 99 point whatever percent. I think we've had those statistics regarding Virginia permit holders. They are overwhelmingly law-abiding. And so the notion that we would even need that 24/7 check, I think, is plays into the false premise that these folks should be put into the same category as common criminals, which of course they should not. If the most often the scenario that would most often occur, which would invoke the 24/7 check or the need for it, would be a traffic stop. Typically, these traffic stops have absolutely nothing to do with a weapon, and so were someone to have run afoul of the law in some serious way involving the gun, or if they were wanted, they're going to be arrested. The next day, they can certainly find out whether their permit was valid when the sun comes up and the system comes online in Georgia or Colorado or wherever it is, and they can charge them with another offense. Otherwise, the fact that this gun is involved is not relevant to the traffic stop itself. The fact that someone has a permit means that they've gone to the trouble to be licensed by their state. And again, the only problem, if there is one, with Virginians receiving reciprocity in these 3 remaining states is that these 3 states do not have that 24/7 check, which again I don't believe is necessary given the overwhelming law-abiding nature of those folks, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, one final follow-up question for the patron.
Gentleman yield?
I yield.
Gentleman yields.
So the position of the state police is that they are opposed to the bill. Is that correct or incorrect?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't know that the state police is permitted to say that they take it that far. I know they express some concerns, probably along the lines that the gentleman has expressed in his questions or is getting ready to express. Those concerns only relate to this 24/7 check. The reasons that I believe it's not necessary were just explained. Sometimes many agencies, including the state police, make their feelings known privately to members in ways that they would not normally do so in committee. So if he's had those experiences and he wants to share them, he's certainly welcome to do that.
Thank you.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its 3rd reading? As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. Bill is engrossed and passed to its 3rd reading.